About a year ago, I described how much I enjoyed using my Steam Deck. Though it caused some hand cramps, had loud fans, and was the epitome of a bad touchscreen keyboard experience, I appreciated its design nonetheless. And even while its performance ceiling was already in sight with a game as big as Elden Ring, it still seemed to have more than enough raw performance to last at least a few years of newer games and help me dig through my Steam back catalog. Not to mention, it blew all my other computers out of the water with regards to convenient high-end emulation. As long as I stayed away from most PS3 games, it seemed like a solid way to play older console games without worrying about the handheld's performance marring the experience. Overall, the Steam Deck seemed to live up to its hype as an almost perfect marriage between Valve's Steam controller and a handheld Steam machine. For a handheld nerd like me who's gotten a ton of mileage out of his Nintendo Switch but could occasionally use just a tad bit more performance on the go, it seemed like a particularly good deal for something with a starting price less than $500. A lot's happened in the handheld landscape over the past year though. Has any of that actually changed the viability of the Steam Deck? Well, sort of. I've logged hundreds of hours playing games on and tinkering with my Steam Deck. Throughout that time, I felt my perspective on the Steam Deck shift ever so slightly in terms of its usefulness and its place among my own various other consoles and handhelds. While it's still impressive, and I'd say still worth considering for anyone looking for a handheld PC these days, my long-term usage doesn't quite fit how I envision myself using the device when I originally reviewed it. Before unpacking that further, let's touch base with some gripes I still have about the hardware just in general. First off, it still seems incredibly prone to creating hand cramps when played for several hours straight. Straight sides on a controller just aren't great for ergonomics. I do think it takes slightly longer for the cramps to kick in these days based on how I've settled into gripping the machine, but it's still not great. Also, while I don't mind the device's heft for use at home, I found the overall size to be problematic for travel, especially when combined with the official carry case. If it's the only thing I'm taking on a day trip, it's fine, but realistically, I'm usually packing at least my Surface Pro in my bag, if not my MacBook Pro, along with a few other accessories. I went on a trip to the UK back in May and physically could not fit a Steam Deck into my bag while still taking my Surface, Switch, charging bricks, and other necessities. Take that alongside some still loud fans, regardless of the comments y'all left on the original reviews, and it's an inconvenient handheld to travel with for folks traveling in close quarters or where packing space is at a premium. What's worse, part of my left shoulder button broke at some point during just normal usage. The button now doesn't register any presses toward the outside of the console. I'm sure it'll annoy me enough one day to the point where I'll open it up and see if I can fix it, but yeah, buttons breaking at all on any handheld within a year of normal usage isn't a great experience. You know what's also not a great experience? The touchpads when playing any game. Now, I know some of y'all live and die by those touchpads, and there are some legitimate use cases for them. Don't get me wrong, but I just haven't encountered a game that I personally play where they're particularly useful. I originally thought they'd be good to use for mouse aiming, like on a Steam controller, but they're just too small for my comfort. I feel like my opinions would change if Valve had designed them as slightly recessed circular wells, like on a Steam controller, instead of squircle flat pads. But, you know, it is what it is. Believe it or not, those gripes are kind of where my issues end with the hardware. There are more than a few aspects I wouldn't mind tweaking slightly, but I tend to still enjoy what's here already. For example, the control scheme still feels comfortable overall. It's one of the few handhelds that has just about the right amount of travel on the triggers, and the placement of the D-pad and action buttons fare well for playing RPGs and platformers. The two extra menu buttons have also been unexpectedly convenient for basic things which might not be obvious to folks at first, like checking the time while playing a game or swapping control schemes in desktop mode. Having easy access to settings and overlays has also been much appreciated for other niche things like swapping audio output to my speaker, checking performance for video footage, or even rearranging the entire control scheme on the fly. Meanwhile, while I'm not a fan of the touchpads in games, the usability of the handheld itself would decrease dramatically if they'd been omitted altogether. Having dedicated mouse and scroll wheel control has been crucial for not only desktop mode, but also navigating progressive web apps I've added as non-Steam games, or emulators that require some awkward tweaking mid-use. I use them so much for so many different projects that I couldn't see myself buying another handheld PC that didn't have similar trackpads included, unless the touch display were as big as my, Surface Pro 9. Heck, unlike with most controllers, I even regularly use the grip buttons. I'll have them mapped as mouse clicks in desktop mode, as well as escape or alt-tab in various configurations to help me exit apps that are frustrating to close without a mouse and keyboard. It's very similar to the way in which I've traditionally used a Steam controller as a navigation device, and it's pretty awesome. Honestly, the Steam Deck's just a really well-designed handheld for all the gaming experiences outside Steam Big Picture mode that someone like me is going to get into while tinkering or figuring out how to work with non-Steam apps. The more time I spend using it, the more I appreciate the extra layer of controls and controller settings available via Steam. It's to the extent where I kind of question the design philosophy of newer handhelds like the ROG Ally, which lack all the extra control features and settings that seem to be necessary here. Still, the execution hasn't been entirely perfect. I love the device for its versatility, but certain creature comforts still aren't available. For example, in gaming mode, there's still no multi-display support, despite Valve's expensive dock having that as their key feature. There's also the fact that the keyboard doesn't automatically pop up by default when I choose a text field in desktop mode, or auto-hide when I exit the text field. But probably most frustrating are the number of times I've attempted to update apps in Discover, only to have the progress stall until I inevitably give up hours later. As with most Linux-related issues, there are workarounds via the console, but using a command line on this device without an external keyboard is also a real pain. It tends to take up most of the screen, and like any touchscreen keyboard, tends to feel slow to use in these circumstances. There are a ton of these small-ish issues that crop up every once in a while that would frustrate me to no end if this were my primary computer. Since it's not though, and these small issues have usually occurred while I'm doing something outside the Steam Deck's core function of, playing games through Steam, it hasn't really been a deal breaker. But it does emphasize that someone would have to enjoy tinkering and working around some jank to consider a handheld Steam Deck as something beyond a gaming device. I also feel that it's necessary to point out that sometime after my reviews, I upgraded my microSD card from 256 gigabytes to 512 gigabytes due to frequently hitting storage limits. Between it and the 512 gigabytes of internal memory, I have about 300 gigabytes of storage left at the moment. Steam games take up the largest chunk, but the abundance of ROMs I have on my SD card are also a significant factor here. Steam games are just really large these days, and ROMs for newer consoles like Wii U add up quickly. I'm bringing this up to say that 1 terabyte of storage has turned out to be more necessary than I might have guessed a year ago to feel really comfortable with the amount of storage I have available. It also means the $400 price tag for the base 64 gigabyte model is kinda a farce, since anyone buying it would need to slap down an extra $50+ for either a large microSD card or replacement SSD. That might seem kinda nitpicky, but $400 is quoted so much these days as a target price for high performance machines or as a disqualifier for less performant machines past the $300 mark. It's gotten to the point where any handhelds, even with an earshot to $400, are overlooked by a ton of folks who will just say, you know, for that price, you can just buy a Steam Deck. In reality, the ideal configuration will likely be at least 256 gigabytes of internal memory, plus something like 512 gigabytes of a micro SD card for additional space. Based on that, folks should really be quoting around $500 for the base tier, unless they know someone just needs a device to use for cloud streaming, for which, honestly, they might as well have gotten something cheaper like the Logitech G Cloud instead. Now, refurbished prices could bring the starting price down further. However, those need to be reliably in stock first. Plus, the varying quality of refurbished devices could also be a mixed bag that requires you to spend more time messing with and troubleshooting a machine than if you just bought brand new. That's a matter of preference, for sure, but I think around $500 still sounds about right for anyone buying a base Steam Deck at regular price these days. Regardless of price point, comfy hardware and appropriate storage is only half the battle for a handheld. The other half is whether or not it's actually still performant enough for my use cases. And I think that's been the largest shift in my view of the Steam Deck over time. Early on, I noted the likelihood that Steam Deck owners would find their hardware outdated much faster than home console owners. Gaming in the PC space just moves quite fast. Developers aren't often optimizing games specifically for common PC builds, and given that I could already see performance limits early on, it made sense that a lot of people might feel more tension to upgrade much sooner than, say, a Nintendo Switch owner. I mean, for reference, my launch day Switch still plays large games that released this year incredibly well. While I'd love to have a ton of confidence that my Steam Deck will be able to play the biggest games available on Steam in 2028, as well as my Switch can play Tears of the Kingdom today, I do still have my doubts. However, my overall perspective regarding the amount of necessary performance has shifted slightly. Yes, if you're someone hunting for the best graphics and frame rates possible, the Steam Deck has an even more limited lifespan now than it did a year ago. For you, newer devices from Asus, Ayaneo, or maybe even Lenovo might be better bets. Even those are bound to be outdated within a year though. Chasing performance on a handheld is just kinda a losing battle, if I'm being honest. Plus, I don't think the Steam Deck ever actually appealed to folks chasing performance metrics beyond the surface level hype generated from a new, cheap handheld by Valve hitting the market. Nor do I think that industry-leading raw performance has ever been the Steam Deck's greatest selling point. Instead, I think the sheer flexibility of this machine allows it to sit somewhere on the crossroads of the Switch's fantastic indie experience and the best of the current handheld emulation scene. In fact, that's how I've pretty much been using my Steam Deck over the past year. While I did have a period of time in which I tried to finally work my way through games like Fallout 4 and the Tomb Raider trilogy, those attempts tended to land me on the same feeling of, you know, it looks so much better if I just play this on my Series X instead. To be clear, that's not me saying that the Steam Deck is terrible at playing these games. Especially with the expansion of the Steam Deck Verified program, it's doing quite well keeping up with some of the biggest games releasing today, especially given the number of developers who seem to be actually targeting optimizations at lower end settings to fit the Steam Deck. It's just that, given some of the current performance and display limits of the Steam Deck, there's this huge potential FOMO, for me at least, if I opt to start a massive game on it rather than something else I own, which I know will play the game better. This tension has led to most of the playtime on this machine being dedicated to indie games or smaller, more handheld experiences that have similar performance regardless of the method I want to play them. For example, my wife Emily, currently behind the camera, played through both Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion and Cult of the Lamb entirely on the Steam Deck. Meanwhile, I've dedicated a ton of time toward Temtem, Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, and Slay the Spire. None of these are graphically intense games that push the Steam Deck's limits. Yet, they feel perfect to play on the handheld nonetheless. I can't tell you the number of nights I've settled on the couch with the TV on in the background, picked up the console for my coffee table, and tried to casually get just a little further in my Slay the Spire run. It's a comfortable experience and a load more convenient than most of my other devices for most of my digital library. Convenience is key for these sorts of experiences, and Steam gaming has never felt more convenient for me. As a result, I've been drifting toward buying more smaller games on Steam just to play those games on my Steam Deck. Now, don't get me wrong. Every once in a while, I might boot up a more intense game I'll get via this month's Humble Bundle, like Ghostwire Tokyo, just to scratch an itch, but it's honestly never for long. In general, it's just a slightly less pleasant experience overall, in which every play session starts with a solid 15 minutes arguing with the settings to figure out what the best toggles are for performance. And, not to mention, more resource-intense games cause the fans to ramp up quickly while tanking the 5+ hours of battery life I'll typically get with the games I usually play. While I enjoy having the option of playing almost any game in my library, I'll typically resort to cloud streaming or just playing on one of my home consoles if I want to play a game that's more graphically intense, especially since it'll likely look better with better settings. To some, that might sound quite limiting, but it's surprisingly opened up a brand new use case for my Steam Deck that I didn't really consider a year ago. I've had an especially good time starting a game like Cassette Beasts via Game Pass on my Steam Deck, and then once I've decided I want to play more, just moving to my Series X for a larger gameplay experience. Rather than it replacing any of my previous devices, I've found my Steam Deck to work in concert with those devices to provide additional ways for me to play the games I want to play, and oftentimes increase the convenience of trying a game in the first place. In general, having a handheld PC as convenient as my Switch is perfect for how I like to play a lot of newer games. As performant as my PS5 and Xbox Series X are, they're not exactly portable, and picking up random indie games for Steam is a lot easier than for my home consoles or my Switch, especially since I prefer to buy physical copies of my Switch games whenever I can. As such, the Steam Deck's kinda slotted in perfectly as a fantastically convenient way to play less demanding titles that I wouldn't otherwise be buying for my consoles, or to simply try a game first before dedicating time to it on my living room TV. From that perspective, I think there actually is a good chance that toward the end of this decade, I'm still going to be able to use my Steam Deck in the same way I am right now. Of course, a huge part of that longevity will likely be due to emulation. If you've been following along with the last year of this channel, you'll have seen me post various videos showing how great a form factor like this can be for emulation in general, and dual screen emulation specifically. Now, I'll readily admit that strapping a portable monitor to my Steam Deck is a neat party trick, but has varying degrees of usability. As someone with 2 Surface Duos, a handful of DSs, and a few 3DSs, I have a ton of methods I personally prefer to use to play Nintendo's dual screen handheld games. Creating those guides was more about me giving folks an option if they also like tinkering or don't have the same number of options that I do. However, using that party trick, or even just a USB-C monitor to play Wii U games, has actually come in clutch. Since I posted my video back in March about backing up Wii U games for use with Cemu, my Wii U that I've had for about a decade has started to display memory errors while playing installed games. Unfortunately, that error is becoming more common with Wii U's over time, and I'm basically just not touching my console until I arrange a more permanent fix. It sucks, but it's also meant that the Steam Deck has been the best way for me to play most of my Wii U games. A ton of Wii U games can actually be played entirely on the gamepad without an issue, I've really enjoyed casually playing New Super Mario Bros. U and Mario Kart 8 in the same pick up and play sort of way I play Steam games. And while I don't do it frequently, it's been awesome to casually plug my Steam Deck into a monitor or mount a phone to get the full Wii U experience. It's unique, something I can't emulate on any of my other handhelds or computers, and it's a feature that prevents certain games from being a mixture of frustrating and unplayable. If someone were looking for a method to play their Wii U collection away from their console, I still think the Steam Deck's probably the best option available without getting into more complex setups. Outside dual screen emulation, I've also had a ton of fun using it for GameCube and PS2 emulation. Unlike Wii U emulation, I do have various handheld ways to play these games, but I've been consistently drawn toward using my Steam Deck instead due to it being more convenient, having a touch smoother performance, and being a load more comfortable than a clip-on controller connected to a phone. Again, convenience is key here, and that convenience is a significant performance benefit of the Steam Deck over other emulation options I have available. That performance isn't likely to go away over time either. Whether I try to play these games next week or next decade, it should be able to pump out the same level of performance or better as long as the hardware doesn't degrade, which is great. Even if Steam games become more demanding than its APU can handle, the large library of Wii U games and beyond is going to make the Steam Deck a more than satisfying console to keep a hold of for many, many more years. That's especially true if PS3 and PS Vita emulation continue to press forward and increase compatibility with a greater proportion of their respective libraries. There are a ton of games, like the Infamous series, that I just love to dig into, but emulation isn't the greatest at the moment, and finding space in my setup to connect to PS3 is a bit of a hassle. If we start to see massive improvements to harder to emulate consoles, there's a good chance the Steam Deck will only increase in usability over time. Which kind of leads me to an interesting final thought. Is the Steam Deck actually the last handheld that I'll need to buy for the foreseeable future? As I've described already, it has more than enough processing power to handle my current use cases. Until PS4 and Xbox One emulation on handhelds become a thing, or mobile processing power jumps so significantly that I can't possibly resist, what would actually drive me to trade my Steam Deck in for something new? Well, beyond the fact that I like discussing gaming hardware with y'all. In many ways, the Steam Deck just still feels like a home run from Valve in terms of the overall device's quality. It does so many things adequately right now that I can't see any reason for someone actually buying a Steam Deck today to need to upgrade within the next 4 years or so, outside a fundamental rethinking of the mobile processing landscape. Even then, for folks using their Steam Decks in the same way I am right now, Valve's follow-up hardware would likely need to come with a dramatic performance or design upgrade for it to seem like a worthwhile purchase. But regardless, I think there's still a bit of time before a Steam Deck 2 is announced, if ever. Though I'm interested to see if their approach to a sequel could tempt me to trade my current handheld in, what's here right now continues to impress me a year later, while feeling right at home in my collection as a convenient way to play my Steam library. It's not quite the hyper-performant handheld that was hyped back around launch, nor do I think it's ever really been that kind of device, if I'm being honest. There's more than enough horsepower to play newer demanding games, for sure, but smaller indie games and emulation is where the console has really shined for me. As long as my left shoulder button remains the only broken component for the foreseeable future, I can see the Steam Deck being my go-to Steam machine for quite a long time. Those are my thoughts though. I'd love to know yours. I know a ton of you must have Steam Decks by now. What are your thoughts after spending a ton of time with them? Are there any particular annoyances that you have? Are there any features the Steam Deck has that you really appreciate? Do you have a different device entirely that you tend to recommend to folks over the Steam Deck these days? You've heard my perspective on this machine, and I'd love to know yours down in the comments. As always, if you found this video interesting or informative, go ahead and give it a like, and then get subscribed for more handheld gaming content in the future. Down in the description, I'll also have a ton of links to my other Steam Deck videos I've released in the past year, if you want to check out how my perspectives changed over time. I'll also be sure to add some links to other channels' videos that have a ton of good information that I've personally enjoyed watching. It's going to be all for this video though. Until next time, catch you later.